Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into John Cantellou's wildly fascinating new framework. This is an absolutely crucial deep dive, mainly because it builds directly on his prior work, Beyond Causal Closure. He takes those foundational ideas and just pushes them so much further. Now, if you follow philosophy of mind, you already know that bridging the gap between physical brain matter and our subjective experience is, well, kind of the ultimate frontier in science. And today we're exploring a paper that legitimately asks us to completely rethink how that relationship works. So, you know the classic hurdle, right? The explanatory gap. It's that enduring mystery of how physical wet brain stuff actually creates our inner feelings. Mainstream models love to dismiss things like near-death experiences, deep meditative states, or even just moments of profound intuition as mere neural errors, like just degraded forms of normal cognition. But what if there's something else entirely? What if they aren't glitches at all, but totally lawful reorganizations of our consciousness? All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the explanatory gap, jump into a super practical parking analogy to ground things, explore the three modes of consciousness, unpack this refined construct called omnin, and finally, we are going to completely rethink agency and intuition. Okay, part one, the explanatory gap. Standard neuroscience typically views the brain as this complex machine generating consciousness from the ground up, but that leaves us really struggling to explain extraordinary phenomenology without totally breaking the rules of physics. Now, here is the massive paradigm shift. Instead of viewing the brain as a factory that's just pumping out consciousness from absolutely nowhere, this framework suggests the brain actively organizes and restricts it. Think about consciousness not as this localized product isolated inside a single neuron, but as a dynamic system shaped entirely by constraints. It's kind of like your brain isn't generating the light, it's acting more like a highly complex prism, focusing and limiting that light into specific, usable patterns. Moving right along to part two, the parking analogy. Because let's be honest, constraint-based organization sounds incredibly abstract and academic. So let's ground this in a very concrete physical example. Imagine a totally open, empty field. Vehicles pull in and park randomly with zero structure. Total chaos, right? But introduce some painted lines on the ground, and suddenly, highly stable parking patterns emerge out of nowhere. Now notice you haven't added any new physical force pulling the cars into place. You haven't changed how the engines work. You've literally just introduced relational constraints. Just by limiting the possible arrangements, structured organization naturally emerges on its own. This is the crucial takeaway for all of this. We can completely explain complex mental organization without invoking any supernatural forces or breaking the laws of physics. Order emerges, not through a new force, but through structured limitation. Your human brain acts exactly like those painted lines. Neural processes continuously prioritize sensory input, they manage your attention, and they stabilize your experience. They're providing the necessary constraints to keep your mind from just being total chaotic noise. All right, part three, the three modes of consciousness. Let's take that exact parking lot logic and apply it directly to the human mind. This is where Cantelou significantly expands on his earlier work. He maps out the three modes of consciousness: waking, extraordinary, and fundamental. Now, he's not talking about distinct magical planes of existence here. It's a sliding scale. It is a continuum based entirely on how tightly regulated your neural constraints are at any given moment. Basically, it's all about how intensely your neurobiology is enforcing those mental parking lines. Take waking consciousness, the state you and I are in right this second. It's the most tightly parked mode. It is highly stabilized by these intense survival-oriented filters that lock us into linear time, anchor us to our physical bodies, and force us to focus on immediate environmental demands. Paying attention to traffic, finding your keys. It's incredibly useful for staying alive, but make no mistake, it is highly, highly constrained. Now contrast that super rigid, localized survival mode with fundamental consciousness. And just to be super clear, we aren't talking about a universal soul or a divine mind here. It's a limiting organizational concept, representing a state of maximal openness and minimal stabilization. Picture it like that vast open field we talked about before a single parking line has even been painted. And sitting right on the continuum between those two extremes are states of extraordinary consciousness. So those altered states we mentioned, like deep meditation, near-death experiences, anomalous memories, they aren't magic, and they definitely aren't just cognitive decay. When extreme conditions weaken your everyday neural constraints, those painted lines start to fade. Your awareness naturally expands, resulting in a completely lawful reorganization of your experience. Which brings us to part four, the omnin construct.
So if consciousness is just this shifting system of constraints moving back and forth, we really have to ask, how does it actually persist over time? How does your sense of self hold together?
Enter the Omnon construct. This is a highly refined model building heavily on his previous research. And let me just be extremely clear about what this means. Omnon is absolutely not a hidden energy field or a supernatural soul. It is simply a framework to describe how complex lived experiences are structured right alongside physical brain processes. It's basically the persistent architecture of your mind.
Cantello uses this really beautiful concept called episodic structural persistence. Instead of thinking of memories as isolated files stored on a hard drive, think of life events structurally modifying your constraint relations over time, much like a flowing river shapes its riverbed. The river doesn't remember the specific water that flowed through it yesterday, but its very shape, its deeper relational structure, has been permanently altered by it.
Okay, final section, part 5, rethinking agency and intuition. Let's bring all this fascinating philosophy back down to earth and apply it to your everyday life, specifically how you make choices and have moments of sudden creativity. You know how standard neuroscience often points out that our brains show activity related to decisions before we're consciously aware of them? Well, a lot of people use that to say free will is an illusion. But this framework argues your agency isn't an illusion at all. It just begins in a much deeper pre-conscious layer of constraint formation, before it finally bubbles up into your explicit awareness. And this makes so much sense of intuition and creativity. When you purposefully relax your waking constraints, like when you're daydreaming or in that hazy, sleepy state right before bed, you aren't so rigidly locked into survival processing. Relaxing those tight constraints allows spontaneous, creative insights to just effortlessly surface. Your agency is entirely real, but it is deeply integrated and constrained within your physical systems. As Cantello points out, your intentions are the lawful expression of structured organization. It's an organized possibility rather than some unconstrained magic. Yes, your choices absolutely matter, but they are shaped by that riverbed of your prior constraints. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. I want to leave you with one massive, provocative question to chew on. If what you consider normal, waking consciousness, is really just a heavily stabilized, tightly parked survival mode, what else is actually possible? The next time you experience a flash of deep intuition or an altered state, consider that you might not be breaking the laws of physics. You might literally just be shifting the constraints of your own phenomenological organization. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning the boundaries.